Thank you guys all for coming. My name is Heather Rule. I'm the National Technical Manager over for Tech or H.B. Fuller Adhesives. I have two lovely assistants today. I've got Josh and John, who are area technical managers with us. And then we also have over here Chris Kane, who is our digital technical manager. Chris, what are you doing?
Eating a sandwich.
You're eating a sandwich. You realize that we're giving a presentation right now.
On sandwiches.
On sandwiches? No, we're giving a presentation on a flooring sandwich.
I thought you meant a sandwich with meat and cheese and bread.
No, it's a presentation on the layers of the flooring sandwich. You know, like moisture mitigation, self-leveler, adhesives.
I saw sandwich in the title of your email.
You saw sandwich? Yeah, and you're not able to eat it. Can you help me actually present this, or do you need to eat your sandwich first?
I guess I can wait. We can do this.
Is your mic on?
Looks like it's on.
Sweet.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
Okay. Maybe I wasn't holding close enough.
Yeah. Gotta pretend you're eating. You know, instead of the sandwich, you pretend you're eating the microphone. You get that close to it.
Can you hear me?
Louder.
Louder. All right. I
You
got
can
a
do
voice this year, so
Yeah, right?
I'll just talk loud.
Okay, so Chris, a while back you and I were talking about some of the challenges in the flooring industry, and one of the things we talked about was moisture, and you spent a lot of time in Florida, and I hear Florida has a bit of a moisture challenge.
Yes, and the story that comes to mind when we talk about moisture was a project down in South Florida where they built a medical center basically on top of the Everglades. So the installers knew they needed to test for moisture. And the project was about 24,000 square feet, and this was the biggest job these installers had done to date. So they did their moisture test, and it came back within acceptable limits.
Real quick, you said moisture test, like singular.
Yes. They tested one spot out of the 24,000. They should have tested at least 24, one per 1,000 square feet. So it was the largest job they ever did, so they didn't realize they needed to do multiple tests consistently throughout the project. And wouldn't you know it, the one spot that they did test came back acceptable for the type of adhesive and flooring they were putting down.
Okay, so you're telling me it's really important to check what your moisture levels are before installing your flooring. What happens if you don't? What happened on this job where they didn't test correctly?
Well, in this case, there was moisture in most of the area, and what happened is the adhesive they used started to break down and re-emulsify, and when that happens, you can imagine some really nasty things will be the outcome.
What, like how nasty?
Well, if you remember, I mentioned it was a medical building. So imagine a bunch of professionals come in, dressed beautifully, sit down at their desk and start working all day. And after a couple hours, they get up for a coffee or a water break, and their shoes are glued to the floor. They literally can't pick up their shoes.
That is one way to get people to stay at work late, isn't it? I don't know if that's totally legal, though, from an employer standpoint.
It's probably not legal, but that's what was happening. And if they only would have tested the rest of the areas as they were supposed to, they would have realized they needed to address the moisture.
Okay, so what are our options for addressing moisture?
Well, traditionally, it would be putting down an epoxy moisture mitigation system, a two-part epoxy.
Okay, so like a mixing epoxy, and I don't know if you guys all know, I mean, epoxies can be a little bit challenging to work with. So back in 2017, Tech actually came up with a water-based moisture mitigation system called Liquidam EZ. We called it EZ because it's supposed to be easier to apply than your traditional epoxy products, okay?
Yes, and you know, most installers don't want to use epoxy, so like Heather said, we created a true water-based moisture mitigation system many years ago, and it's been copied by many others, but it has not been, you know, completely duplicated. So others are more of a vapor retarder instead of a true moisture mitigation, and they all have limits as to how high they'll go as parts, RH percentage, and all that, and they all fall short of Liquid Dam Easy.
So you said RH percentage. How high of an RH percent?
100%.
100%. So this goes all the way up to 100%. What
Yes.
about liquid water? Can it handle that?
Liquid water is a whole other conversation that you need to have. This will not prevent liquid water from coming up. You got a bigger problem than moisture.
Maybe it's time to contact a structural engineer at that point, right?
Absolutely.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the application. So we've got our Liquid Dam EZ here in a bucket. Josh here is nicely showing you guys that we have it half coated in Liquid Dam EZ and half not coated. That's because this is a 2-coat application, and I always like to show people what that application looks like, right? So half of it, we're going to pretend this is your second coat. The other half, we're going to pretend this is your first coat going down.
Yes, and this way you can see visually what a job site will look like using one board. And as Josh uses the trowel to meter it out, Heather is going to use the roller, and you can see Josh and Heather are saturating the roller. And that is very important because the first step is Josh is going to key with the trowel the ridges, and that gives you the proper amount for the square footage. And then when Heather comes back with the roller, she evens it out, and that way you know you've got the proper coverage with the Liquid Dam Easy. If it wasn't saturated, what would happen? She would just pull the material off, and you would not have enough down to stop the moisture from coming up.
So we talk about troweling right now to meter everything out. Does that mean you always have to trowel this product out, like every single time?
Almost always, and there's a few circumstances where you don't need to trowel it and you can just roll or apply it. In those cases, or if you have questions or you think you have a case where you only have to roll, we would strongly prefer you come talk to us afterwards or call us and talk it through to make sure that it is appropriate to just roll it. And in those cases, we have very specific guidelines and instructions on how to roll or apply it. So, talk to us so that we can make sure your job goes nice and easily.
Oh, I see what you did there. Liquid Dam Easy, your job goes easily.
What can I say? We come up with some pretty creative product titles in our marketing department.
You're good.
And we try and make it easy for everybody.
So you know exactly what the product is for, right?
Exactly.
Ah, beautiful. So right now we've got this entire area coated. We're a little bit heavy on it, but I think that we're going to call it for this particular demo. So you guys can see that once coated, it's a slightly different color than the first coat, right? So it's a 2-coat application, and basically you're just going to come back and you're going to back roll it, and you're going to try and make sure you don't have any of the puddles or there's not any excess. So typically, again, we'd want to kind of clean up some of these edges, make sure that you've got the right amount of product down, but you want to make sure you're knocking down all these ridges and getting a beautiful full coat of the Liquid Dam EZ. So it is a 2-step application, okay?
Yes, and once you need to wait about 90 minutes between the 2 coats, and then 2 to 3 hours, you can come back and put your next layer of the sandwich, the flooring sandwich.
Oh, thank you. That's exactly right. And some people might think that this is an extra step when compared to an epoxy moisture mitigation system, right? So traditional epoxies, you have to go in, it's 1 coat of epoxy. But here's the critical difference. With epoxies, you then have to come back and prime after the fact. So in the end, you're doing a 2-coat application, but you've got 2 different SKUs on your job site. You've got 2 different SKUs you guys have to understand how to use, right? With this installation method, your second coat acts as your primer. So you don't have to come back and prime it after the fact. It's just a 2-coat application, and then you are ready to go with your self-leveling underlayment.
I was afraid because when you were doing 2 coats, I was thinking epoxy would be easier, but
yeah,
when you explain it that way, it makes total sense to have just 1 product, do 2 things, keep it simple, easy for everybody.
Easy, yeah. Bring that back up again.
Keep coming back to that.
So that does bring us to, normally after you prime or after you do your second coat, you go to the next level of your sandwich, and that's going to be your basically your substrate preparation, okay? And that's going to be a self-leveler or a patch. And then what we're going to talk about today is our Level Set 400 HF.
HF, that's an interesting name, and Some might think it stands for Heather's Fantastic, which I would agree with, but what does it stand for in this case?
In this case, like industry-wide, we would consider HF to be high flow, okay? So there's kind of two different types of self-leveling underlayment out there on the market now. You've got your traditional products, and then you've got what we call your next generation high flow. Traditional products are exactly that. They're a little bit older technology, still perfectly great. They will still get your job done, right? But they are not going to flow as well as a high flow product. So a high flow product is going to be much faster, it's going to be a lot more fluid, it's going to flow a lot better, right?
Absolutely, and when you're talking about flow, and we're going to show you the flow rate in a minute here, what's critical with all self-levelers is you want to get the water ratio correct.
That can sometimes be a little tricky, can't it?
It can be tricky. You know, if you're only doing a couple bags in a little bathroom, you know, probably not that hard to gauge 3 or 4 buckets of water. But if you're doing a larger pour, it's critical that you're consistent with your water rates. And this test will show us that. And with the level set 400, it's developed so that when it's mixed properly and poured properly, it dries not only strong and hard, but very, very smooth. And the high flow makes it easier for the installer during the installation. And then because it's so smooth, it's actually easier for the installer to come back on top of it.
Right, with their adhesive. So how many of you guys have ever seen a flow test like this? In the concrete world, they might call it a slump test. Anybody? Oh, great. This is going to be a great learning experience for everyone today. So we like to use this test with self-levelers, and I hope you guys can notice there are some rings around the edges. Okay? These rings are actually measurements, and what they're going to do is they're going to allow us to measure how far the self-leveler flows and how fast it flows. This is absolutely critical, especially on jobs where you're pumping your self-leveler, because you want to make sure that you have the right water to cement ratio. And when you're doing a pump, you're not measuring bucket for bucket, you're actually, you're pumping, right? So you may or may not be able to perfectly measure what's going on. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do a nice little comparison. I always like to have people be able to see a compare and contrast, right? So we're gonna have a traditional leveler. Who's got the traditional leveler? So Josh over there has the old school technology, the traditional leveler. John here has the new school technology. And what we're gonna do is we are going to use this little test to see which one flows further, faster. And you'll notice they both have cute little pipes. And that's going to meter out the amount of material that you're putting down. So you know that the amount of volume that they are each going to pour out is going to be the exact same. So we can measure that flow very consistently. Now, when you're doing a pump job, you want to be checking this about every 10 to 15 minutes to make sure that your water hasn't drifted as you're pumping, right? And also you want to make sure that you've got the right water ratio kind of going for you as it is. So we've got our little pipes a little bit filled up there. John, you want to top that off there? That looks great. Okay, now I know this is the first day of services, so I know you guys aren't hungover yet. You guys haven't had too much fun in Vegas yet. So I'm going to have you guys help me give a countdown. Okay, we're going to do a 3, 2, 1, and we're going to have them both pull up their pipes and see exactly. I want you guys to notice which one goes faster, which one goes further, okay?
But for this to work, we do need you guys to participate.
Yeah, they can't.
We want to hear you.
They need help, okay? So on the count of 3, come on guys, you can do it. 3, we're not, 3, 2, 1,
go!
Now do you guys see the difference between the two? That's a pretty clear difference, all right? We've got a traditional product that's going to be a little bit more sluggish, and then we have a high flow product that is going to very rapidly expand. And again, when you talk about protrusions on job sites, pipes, fixtures, corners, I want you guys to think about which one of these is going to be easier to install. It's going to be a high flow leveler versus a traditional product.
Yes, and when you're using a traditional product, the installer has to get in there and move it. Like Heather said, the high flow goes around if you have a pipe or a column or something. When you're pouring, it'll go around it, so you don't have to work it. A traditional, you got to get your spikes on and get out there and roll it and help it turn corners. And really, the high flow makes it easy for the installers.
See, this isn't Liquid M easy, this is high flow, so you can't use that word for this section of the presentation.
Well, it does make it easier.
So one of the nice things with the new kind of next generation products is not only are they going to be higher flow, easier to install, but they're going to be setting up faster. So this product is going to be a walkable hardness in 2 to 3 hours, and you're going to be able to set your moisture sensitive flooring in 15 hours. Okay? A lot of levelers might say you have to wait 24 hours for that moisture sensitive flooring. And for most installers, that probably means you stop laying at 3 p.m. and you're back on it the next morning at what, 7?
It's 7.
Is that 24 hours? 3 p.m. to 7 a.m.?
It's not, and most traditional want you to wait 24 hours. So if you follow the directions and wait 24 hours, you're basically losing most of that day for that area. Whereas with the level set 400, you're back the next morning, like Heather said, and can be complete in as little as 2 days.
As little as 2 days, yeah. And so with this system, you've got your leveler, and then the next thing that we're going to talk about is adhesives. Now, there's a lot of challenges in the adhesives world, okay? And we on the adhesive side are seeing more and more challenges with the type of flooring that are being laid down. We've got, for example, rubber mats like that are going down in gyms, and those rubber mats typically come in a roll. They have a lot of memory. They want to curl up on you. Also, when you've got gym floors that are going in like that, that's a lot of weight sitting on them. And a lot of traditional water-based adhesives over time can be displaced by that weight. Not only in gyms, but you're also dealing with that in hospitals. And you guys ever looked at hospital beds when they're rolling through the hallways? That's a lot of point load, a lot of weight on that flooring. And again, if you've got a water-based adhesive, oftentimes that water base can be displaced by that. So that's a lot of challenges right there.
It is, and traditionally you would need to use a strict epoxy adhesive for that. And you know, nothing will scare an installer more than the word epoxy on a spec. Most want nothing to do with it. We've talked about what a pain it is, the health hazards, and because you have to set your flooring while the adhesive is wet, Heather mentioned the roll of rubber. We've got a small piece, but when you're doing a whole roll, it's going to have memory, so it's going to want to curl back. So what installers have to do is weigh it down, and often they use bricks, so they need to lug bricks
so
to the job site.
They're lugging an entire pallet of bricks just to lay bricks on the seams to weigh them down.
Yes, and that's a huge pain.
Like a literal pain in your back, right? Because you have to put all those bricks down after you've already installed your adhesive.
Yes, and if they don't bring the bricks, then they're scrambling, trying to find a pail or whatever they can on the job site to weigh it down to prevent it from curling up. And if they don't do that, the worst case scenario is it looks good and then they leave. And then when they come back, it's set, but your seams and your edges are curled. So that's a challenge in the industry. Do you take a risk with the curling, or do you lug bricks or something else heavy to the job site? So our chemist came up with the Flexera 2K PSA, which is a hybrid epoxy, and we're going to be showing that here today. And this, when you set the flooring, you can trawl it, and it's really, you've got a long open time. So you mix it, which they did backstage, and you can trawl it out, and you've got a few hours to come back to set.
Hold on, did you say you've got a few hours?
Yes.
So with an epoxy, you'd never have a couple hours.
Exactly. If you let an epoxy sit for a couple hours, you would know it because of the fumes would knock you out. The fire department would be called.
Yeah, I'd rather not evacuate the convention hall if we could avoid that.
Yes, so with epoxy, you got to stay on top of it, trowel it out, set your flooring. This, you trowel it out, let it tack up. Once it tacks up, then you're able to set your flooring into it. And right now you see Josh, he's using the trowel to get the right amount. You let that tack up, and then you can come back with your flooring. And the key thing is, unlike the epoxy, it's not going to curl up.
Okay, so you could do either a wet set method like what Josh is doing for us right there, or you could do an actual, like a traditional PSA method like we've got kind of started over here, correct?
Correct. Before we came out on stage, Josh and John troweled this out about a half hour ago. So it should start getting its tack and be ready to set flooring, which we have a piece of rubber to show here.
So even if you had a product with memory, this is going to be tacky enough that it likely is going to make it so you don't need those bricks you've got in your hand.
Yeah, you don't need bricks anymore.
Yes, sir.
How long do you wait for drying time on this?
Typically it's going to be 20 to 30 minutes. So we're a little bit early on this one, just to be honest. I hope you guys can understand. It's hard to time these things. But yeah, so typically 20 to 30 minutes. You're going to see there's a bit of a color change to it, and you can see that already kind of starting to happen between the actual, like the fresh adhesive versus the one that's kind of set up a little bit longer. So it will look very similar to like what a traditional water-based product would look like once it's kind of fully tacked up. But again, one of the bigger differences is you're going to have a much longer pot life than you would with a traditional epoxy. You're going to be able to use that PSA application method instead. Because it's a hybrid product, you're not going to be dealing with quite the same challenges you have with an epoxy, right?
And the other thing is, you know, it'll last in the bucket. You can come by our booth at the end of the day, and we'll still be using this bucket at our booth. It'll still be good.
Yeah. So that's kind of is it already tacking up? We sticky? There we go. So we're already starting to tack up here. That's looking great. So this kind of brings us to the end. I call our flooring sandwich. You know, you've got everything from your moisture mitigation to your self-leveling, your high flow self-leveling underlayment, and a new hybrid epoxy adhesive that'll work for all your challenging installations, right, Chris?
Absolutely. And I like to think we have the best warranty in the industry.
Yeah, well, so that's a great point. When you use all three of these types of products together, you actually upgrade to what's called a system warranty. So when you stay with one manufacturer for all levels of your flooring sandwich, your warranty is actually improved because you're using a system versus just a product, okay? And as Chris mentioned, I think we have one of the better system warranties in the industry.
Well, and Heather mentioned at the beginning, she's our national technical manager. So you know that means she handles the warranty process and the claim process. So it's not just somebody saying, oh, it's a warranty, blah, blah, blah. It truly is, because if it isn't, she's the one that's not sleeping at night, worrying about it, taking care of it. So she stands behind it. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, I don't need to lose any more sleep. So I just want to thank you guys so much for coming to chat with us today about our flooring sandwich. We will be here all week, and you can find us. You can just barely see our booth right over there. It is 5461, and we would love to chat with all of you guys. Go ahead and stop by. Otherwise, we will be back here at 1 o'clock and doing another demonstration. Thank you guys so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Look, Mom. I made that.